Welcome to Uncomfortable, conversations about culture and Christianity. My name is Eric, and today I'm joined by Jess.
Hello, world.
And Alex.
Happy to be here today, everybody.
And I'm also joined by our new AI co-host, ChatGPT. We're testing this out. This is fun. Hey, ChatGPT, welcome to our podcast called Uncomfortable, conversations about Christian or cultures and Christianity. Did you get that? We're waiting.
Yes, I got it. Welcome to your podcast, Uncomfortable, conversations about cultures and Christianity.
Close.
What topic are we diving into today?
Well, mostly we just don't have an opener. Nobody called and left us a voicemail. So if you could just give us something to talk about at the intersection of culture and Christianity, maybe a question you could pose us that we could answer for our listeners, that'd be awesome.
How about this? In what ways can the principles of Christianity be applied to navigate modern cultural challenges? It opens up discussions on how faith intersects with contemporary issues like technology, diversity, and social justice.
Yeah, that's good, but I think we'd rather you just come up with some icebreaker for us to talk about.
Sure thing. How about this? Share a moment when you faced a cultural challenge or dilemma as a Christian and how you navigated it. It's personal, engaging, and sets the tone for deeper discussions on cultural intersections with faith.
Well, that was a risk, and we're done talking to ChatGPT this week. Do you guys have any stories about share a moment when you faced a cultural challenge or a dilemma as a Christian and how you navigated? Any of those you have? ChatGPT would love to hear it.
Every election year.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like that's it. But I don't know. I just always hate that feeling of you can't talk openly about either party without being pinned as the opposite of that.
Yeah.
That or you're opposing them. So yeah, I think that's tough, especially, but then you layer that with a Christian belief system, and then that it makes it even more complicated because of the way the party lines are divided. Like if you care about social justice, which is also, I think, something that Christ cares about, then you're a liberal. But if you bring up abortion, then you're Republican, or so it's just tough because I think the party lines don't really align with Christ's teachings very well. So you can't have very critical conversations with people without kind of being pigeonholed.
Yeah. Jess, how about you?
I would say this is just purely off the top of my head, but I do feel like even in my neighborhood, like we live in a little bit of an older neighborhood and just like different ages, ages of people having kids. And so just different generations and walks of life. And I do feel like as a Christian, there's times like when like neighbors come together. I wouldn't necessarily say it's like instigated, but it does sometimes feel baited of like, well, you're a Christian, so what do you think about this? And it feels like there's an expectation at times to have that really strong conservative, the expectation of being legalistic. And so I feel like a lot of times there's conversations even like among neighbors of like, everybody like really likes your family and like, but how is that possible with you being a Christian? And just like the fact of like, even how we are, like I am on the podcast of like, I'm not going to go and like tear somebody's house down because they have a strong opinion that I might oppose. And I think that there's a way of being friends with people and interacting with our culture and not bringing shame or using Christianity as a weapon. And I think that that's like, I don't want to say it's like an art form, but it really is like something that you have to learn.
It's a delicate
and so
dance.
I feel like it's a delicate dance, and sometimes maybe that may come off to other people as passive, but I think it's a beautiful part of Christianity to be able to show that side, but it's something that's, I don't think, expected.
Yeah.
It's good. Which to choose. I think like you both said, it's difficult. One of the things I've found myself mostly in is when people want to not realize the nuance of so many different conversations in culture. And I think we talk about this a lot on the podcast, but it does seem like people want you to pick an extreme stance on so many different things. And so for one example, I'll put out there is when people are talking about gender pronouns, for example. I'll just give a specific example from my own family. There's people that are always, I will never ever call somebody a pronoun or use a pronoun that is not their what God gave them, their God assigned, pronoun at birth or gender at birth. And then I have a lot of conversations with people. Like I have a sibling who's transgender. We've talked about that on the podcast and a few different times and had them on an episode. And the reality is my kids have only known my sibling, Precious, as an aunt. Like they look at them, all they see is female, right? So my kid, that's all they know. And that's all they could recognize. And so my kids are so young that for me, I'm like, no, it would actually probably be more confusing if I took this hard stance in this conversation and say, well, no, you're wrong. Hey kids, like at what point do I just say, hey, you're two. And, let me start talking to you about how everything isn't as it appears and like have those kinds of conversations. And so those conversations will happen at some point. And even my sibling's not afraid of me having that conversation with my kids, but it's having them at the age appropriate time. And so I think, again, there's nuance to a lot of even those conversations where people just want to throw an entire blanketed statement or a politicized statement or whatever. And some people would say, oh, that's just weak. That's just stupid. That's whatever. And I don't think so. Like, I don't think that's weak or that's being afraid of the truth or any of those things. It's my ultimate job as a dad is to steward the hearts and the minds of my kids and point them to Jesus. And so much of that would be not even pointing them to Jesus. It'd be pointing them in totally weird, different directions by having some of those conversations too early. So,
well, it's not a unique characteristic of Christianity to want to seek comfort. I think that's like a human thing. And a lot of times, whether you're a believer or not, we come at things from finding comfort. And it is comfortable to have defining lines. And I think sometimes people want to seek that comfort. So it's like, hey, if you can just tell me, I want to hear it like it is. I want to find that safe space and within my belief system, and that's good enough for me. But when you introduce, ambiguity and paradox and all these other concepts, it makes people very uncomfortable. And when you're uncomfortable, you feel less safe. And I don't think people are willing to always admit that, especially like if it's coming from a masculine perspective, because it's like, well, that's not manly to admit that I don't feel safe. But a lot of that, I think, is where that comes from. And it's, like I said, it's not uniquely Christian. It's uniquely human, maybe. But yeah, it's a tough thing to balance.
It is.
Yeah. And I think, and I'd probably say this ad nauseum too, but I am very, like, if you want to call it whatever you want to label it in my positions on things, like I'm very much like, hey, this is what Scripture has to say. And the more I've dove into Scripture on all sorts of topics that people would label as conservative or liberal or whatever, the more I've become solidified in my position. Like, no, Scripture is pretty clear about a lot of these things inside our society, but Scripture is also clear about our posture towards people. And I think oftentimes people use their position about a subject or a person or a dilemma as the thing that is more supreme than our posture towards people. And, Jesus was very clear, he'd tell people go and sin no more, but always he led with a posture that said, I see you, you are made in the image of God. And again, Jesus was always clear about who the real enemy is. And so Jesus didn't label humans as enemies. Even with Peter, like Peter was like saying things against God and wanting to go protect him. And he's like, get behind me, Satan. He even recognized that nuance in Peter wasn't even his own willingness, but it was the real enemy that was causing him to look at things in a different way and to call Jesus out and all those types of things. And so I think, anyway, ChatGPT, you got us way too deep to start this episode. So
not a very lighthearted intro. But yeah, what we are actually here to talk about today is how can we stay focused in a distracted world? We got screens and alerts and places to be, and we are more connected than ever and probably equally as distracted. So we're going to have a little bit of conversation of that, so stay tuned. There is always something to distract us. Maybe it's this podcast. Maybe you're listening to this so you can be distracted from who knows what. But I do think it's becoming increasingly difficult to stay focused. I'm even finding that with movies and TV. Like I'm going there for entertainment really as a distraction, and I can't even stay focused on that. My attention span is so shot. But yeah, I think it's all around us. I think it's impacting the way we, interact with our families, the way we interact with our church, the way we interact with our work, how we do work. Like, I think most jobs now, people are allowed to just have their phones with them, and those things are distracting to them. I don't know. It's all around us. It's not just technology. It could be a coping mechanism. So that's kind of the overall thought of what we're talking about today. But Jess, do you have anything else you'd add to introduce this idea of distraction?
I think it's something that we don't realize that we're doing until, especially like in my practice, I see it a lot where people are saying like, I didn't realize I was distracted till it's like the end of the day. And now I feel overwhelmed because there were things I wanted to do that I didn't get done. And maybe those things were anxiety inducing or just not something that I wanted to do. But I think more and more we're seeing in our culture of, if you want to procrastinate, there are things to make it easier for you. Or if something's really difficult, there is very accessible things that can take our attention for minutes and hours. And so I think it's, what's the balance in that? What are some ways to help us even catch up or feel like we can have more control or balance with that when that's so accessible in our culture?
All right. So I'd say one of the prime examples of things that distract us are in digital mediums, whether that's TV, streaming, phones, computers, whatever you want to say. The internet in general probably is very helpful, but also very distracting. So what are some of those examples that we could look at that, like what are I guess what I'm asking is, what are the reasons that we're drawn to finding those distractions? Is it because of anxiety or loneliness, uncomfortable real life interactions we have with people?
I think going back to the human and how we were created, one of the things you find in the Genesis of Genesis is that man was not made to be alone. Part of being made in the image of God means being made for community, being made for something beyond just us. And so I think a part of the human condition, and it's good, even this is before sin and all that entered the world. God said it's not good for man to be alone, and he created a helpmate, someone for him to do life with, and that's part of being made in the image of God. A triune God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit exist eternally in community. And so I think part of the difficulty is we're not made to be alone, and when we start to feel lonely, we want to fill that with different things. And so I think it's a double-edged sword because we're not made to be alone. And so that's a good acknowledgement of ourselves, like isolation and so on and so forth isn't good. And so that's wired into us as humans. But then I think it's where we go seek that fulfillment or that community, that camaraderie that can become maybe some of the source of frustration, because it can be a pseudo community that we can build. It can be something that doesn't actually fully satisfy the hunger for community that we have, and yet it can, downplay. It can take the edge off a little bit. And so I think in a lot of these things, and right now, I think the conversation is around mostly digital devices and how we function around those. And I think it'll be wise to talk about that. But this has been stuff that's around for so long. I mean, movie theaters, the genesis of so many movie theaters was, like you were talking about, Eric, this idea for entertainment, and you would walk into this space where it's all black and kind of get caught in these endless hallways. That's what malls were actually built around, was this idea of walking into a space and being distracted by all of the stuff that's happening. And you would walk into a huge building and be able to be distracted by, they weren't apps, but different stores over and over as you walk through it. But it was supposed to disconnect you from the outside world, to be able to walk kind of into this portal where everything else doesn't matter, and it sucks you in. And so attention has been the commodity of humans for a long time, and people have been trying to vie for, grab, steal as much of our attention as they can forever, I think. And so whether that's now talking about the internet or talking about malls or so many things, before that, there's this different kind of attention that's, being grasped for, grabbed. And so I think sometimes I like to talk about digital immigrants, digital natives, and sometimes it's easy for digital immigrants, those who were not born with the iPhone, for lack of better terms. Those people to say, oh, kids are so bad on their phones, and then we want to just dive into that. But you used to do that at the skating rink when you were gone all the time, or you used to do that at the mall. That's where you hung out, or you did that at the park, before. So you were able to distract yourself from a lot of those circumstances. And so I think it's all born out of that same identity that God made us in.
Well, and it's interesting because if you're looping entertainment into it, there's probably a fine line there, but I do think storytelling is an age-old tool for human connection. We see it in the Bible. We saw it with Shakespeare and plays and things like that. We see it in TV and movies now, and even music to a certain extent. And I think that's always been escapism to a certain extent, where people would go and watch something or read a book and a fiction book and get kind of swept into this, alternate world where they could not think about, get lost, not think about their problems. And I think we do that to connect. Even stories will ground us sometimes, or connect us to humanity, or
give us hope,
or help us be more empathetic to other people's plots and lives in the world. And it's just, all of that stuff can be used for good. I think with the introduction of social media, we have definitely seen this more saccharine, bite-size, kind of brain-numbing content that some people indulge in. And you can look at stuff like TikTok or Instagram Reels, and you can find life-giving, valuable, or even just fun, quality entertainment. But then there's also just kind of like nonsense out there as well. But it's tough because I think people will they want to broad stroke it and say, this one that's all bad, or that's, and you don't really know what people are consuming.
And I think why we're saying hyperconnectivity is, to me, the hyperconnectivity is something where once you get into it, there's multiple options to keep you from moving to the next thing without looking up, whether that is your phone, checking an email, and then a social media alert pops up, and then a text message. That could easily happen with being, doing a project inside, and I need to do this, and I need to do this, and I need to do this. And one thing leads to the other. And that hyperconnectivity doesn't create a natural pause for us to look up and say, was somebody talking to me, or did somebody else need me, or was I supposed to do something else? And so I think that that's where we're seeing a lot of anxiety, or an ADHD brain can really thrive in moving from one thing to the next, to the next, to the next. And they can really maybe be productive in that, but then also feel like I've lost something at the end of the day because I got distracted, doing this, and now I'm all the way down here with this, and other things got.
You're reading my mail. Okay, I'm gonna get real personal here. There is a video game that I recently put down. I moved on from it, but I was very obsessive with it. It was called Satisfactory, and it's a game where you essentially are dropped off on this desolate planet, and you have a task to create a factory. And in doing so, it's like you start out by making screws and maybe some, simple little things. And then ultimately you're making these crazy technological things that you're shooting up a space elevator. But it's one of those things where one task leads to another task, to another task. And I found myself just like, I was able to just completely disconnect in that game. Normally I'm not that bad about it, but that one I'm just like, okay, well, I got to make more screws for this, and I got to work on this. I got to check, make sure that this is running efficiently. And I got, and it let me kind of just go into la la land and just not. And sometimes I think that coping mechanism of being able to just disconnect, it's like there's this line of it's healthy to kind of let yourself check out for a while and just not be concerned with everything going on in the world. But then like the scary part is when you kind of go past that and go, yeah, I could just be checked out and I'd be okay with that because I just don't want to deal with my responsibilities right now. And I think it's a really scary line to navigate. And that could be anything for anybody.
Right.
It could be, I'm just going to turn sports on, watch this all day
Totally.
and zone out. I want to do yard work forever. And I don't know. There's just different things where I think we have uncontrollable circumstances in our lives, and we're looking for something that we can control to help us cope with those.
Well, and I think one of the interesting things that the article that kind of spurned some of this conversation from Psychology Today by Dr. Owusu talks about, in one of the quotes, I'm just going to read it here, is the rise in diagnosis of anxiety and overdiagnosis of ADHD, coupled with concerning trends such as the decline of empathy among college students and a rise of narcissistic behavior, highlight the negative consequences of screen-centric lives. And so kind of to your point there, Eric, I think these things that happen so long, especially in a place where we kind of get news all the time, where you can see people beheaded on the internet, you can see the empathy can be something that we're seeing at a loss more and more in our society. It's like degenerating your ability to, one, I think, understand your own feelings, and then two, to understand the feelings of others or to put yourself in someone else's shoes, especially in a noisy, polarizing kind of place. It's becoming this lost thing, or empathy is seen as weakness or whatever you want to call it. And so
it's like we're being desensitized to a certain extent.
True.
I had that like realization, like growing up, I remember my dad would always like watch crime documentary type shows or whatever, the like 60 Minutes or those things where they do the reenactments of what happened. Maybe, I don't know, there was a bunch of them. And I knew he kind of liked watching those. And I would say years later, I'd been married for, 15 plus years, and he's over, in my house, and I turned one of them, like a modern one, on, just thinking, I remember we'd watch this when I was a kid, he'd have this stuff on. And I remember kind of gasping when he saw like the reenactment of the murder scene or something, because it was so gruesome. And to me, I was so desensitized to it because I just kept watching stuff like that as I got older. And he'd kind of unplugged from some of that it was almost like, whoa. And it was a reality check for me. I'm like, why is this so just mundane to me? Like, it didn't even strike me. It seemed mild to me compared to like what else is out there. And so it's just one of those things where I don't think, it's just these things slowly creep into our cultural psyche, and we just start to accept it without that truly is being desensitized in a lot of ways.
I don't feel like I've seen necessarily research on this, but this is just like a thought that I have a lot of times around distraction, is that time obviously has been around since the creation of the world. And to some degree, all of us are very sensitive to time. Like, we look on our phone, we can go through the day, and we have things that are scheduled. And there is something about time is a thief. Like, as we get older, like, and we age and we see changes like in our bodies and in other people, it's like time is a thief. And so part of me gets really curious why there's so much shame and anxiety and depression around, like, I can't get things done, or I do get distracted, because we're so aware of what we lost or like what we didn't do, because it just makes me very curious about like, because we're very sensitive about time as humans, or to some degree. Like some people are like very, very much like we can't be late, we have to be on time and very aware. But to some degree, it makes me wonder like, is shame associated with this at some degree? Is that why we can't get past it? Because we just know like, oh, now I didn't get all that stuff done today, or I just lost an hour on that. Or if you're distracted and I'm like, yo, we were supposed to be somewhere, and what have you been doing for the last 3 hours? Like there's just so much.
Or even just facing the cumulative amount of time that you've lost, not even just in that day, but in your lifetime, and be like, wow, here I am at this age and all the things I didn't accomplish, all the things I thought I would accomplish. And then that just sense of mortality and dread kind of can overtake you, and you want to get away from it.
Right.
You want to avoid it.
And historically, I mean, time being around is since the beginning of time is true, but how time has been perceived and how much we are controlled by a clock is relatively, newer to society in our world, with an agrarian culture, with, the invention of electricity. All of these things expand, we think, our capacity for time and lessen our need for rest and for alone time. And so, because there's certainly a wiring, and I think, again, by God, for rest, for Sabbath. And I don't think that always means doing nothing. And some people, I think, have taken this idea of Sabbath too far, that it's just doing absolutely nothing. I think you can Sabbath by doing things you enjoy, enjoying creation, by working. Dr. Wendell Nelson here at the church always talks about like co-creating with God, like being out in his garden and doing those types of things are one of the most restful things for a soul, because it refills and rebuilds him, and God ministers to him in those ways. And so, but I think the idea of, the light bulb and extending our daytime, extending our work hours, the days that we work, all of those things definitely is more of in the history of the world, a much smaller sliver of this. And so we're still learning how to adjust, and yet we're moving at such a fast pace. Like technology is moving at a faster pace than it ever has. Our devices, the difference between maybe my phone and a book, though I can get lost in both of them, is the book is not buzzing in my pocket. The book is not notifying me and saying, pick me up, pick me up, pick me up, pick me up. And I think that's the adjustment that we're learning. And I think technology companies are realizing this. They're saying, oh no, I don't know what we did. And so Apple and Google, they're really putting a lot of their energy and efforts into these focus modes and this idea of shutting things off, sending you a notification when you're at church every Sunday. Thanks, Apple, for how long you were on your screen, if you're bold enough to actually look at that. And so I think they're realizing, okay, we have to figure out how do we correct this in some spaces. And so
let's talk a little bit about some ways to deal with this. The first suggestion would be just single tasking. Jess, can you help me understand what that is?
So I would say, like, if I'm talking like in my office with somebody about this, there's such a glorification of multitasking, and that's just really been something that people are proud of, and we've kind of pushed that a lot in our culture. And so single tasking, a great example of this would be like, I need to clean my room. And so that is like, you can easily get distracted with like, there's this pile here and there's a pile here. I need to dust here. I need to vacuum there. Single tasking, as an example, would be, I need to clean my room. I'm going to do my laundry first. And even like making a list of like 10 things that equal cleaning your room.
So I just need to make plastic and rubber and screws, and then
one at a time, and then you'll get it all done.
Okay.
But I think that that's a way of getting being able to focus on one thing and then feeling like, okay, I accomplished this one thing, versus like good. This can get very overwhelming when we're looking at a huge task. And then at the end of the day, I didn't get my room clean. Okay, well, you didn't get your room clean. I said this yesterday to somebody. You didn't get your room clean, but what did you do? Like, let's make that list. Oh, you did dust your room. Okay, so that was a task that you did that would have counted. That's not, because we're putting everything into this multitask system where that's not always something that works.
Yeah.
So single tasking would be a good way of focusing.
And it seems, I don't know, this thought just occurs to me. It's like, is it just technology that has got us to this place where we feel so overwhelmed? You know, because it's like so many of these tasks can seem mundane, but yet people are struggling so much to deal with even the mundane stuff. And it's just, I don't know, I'm not saying that people haven't struggled with things for centuries, but it just seems almost like, okay, yeah, these are common things that we all have to take care of on a day-to-day basis. Why is it now our society is struggling so much to deal with it?
I think
is it that technology? Is it?
Yeah.
Say it.
I don't know. It's not popular, but my opinion is that we are the product of past cultures that are hard workers and task driven. And the question, like when someone calls you, is not always, hey, how are you doing? It's what did you get done today? So we're coming out of this high work pressure, our parents, our grandparents, and we are met with a culture that values other things and other things have been created, like technology and different ways of doing something, and we are stuck. And this is why I feel like we can get really distracted, because I think part of it is like stuck. There's these expectations of me that I can't meeting up with a culture that really is fresh and new that I really want to be a part of. And I feel like there is like a sticky part right there where it's hard to move past. That's just my personal opinion.
I don't even want to throw out a number, but I will. I would guess 98% of people that are listening to our podcast right now are probably not single tasking it. You know, as far as even the rise of podcasts and popularity, audiobooks, a lot of these things are because instead of reading a book, even I do this. I'm like, if I'm going to get on the treadmill, I have to also be productive in another way.
Yes.
And so I think the rise in popularity of podcasts, why everybody's doing podcasts, why audiobooks have become so much more popular, all of those things is because it was much more difficult to read a book, and if you're running or whatever. And I think that gets into maybe the next one of the things that I think is helpful is mindfulness, because I think it's more difficult for people to even practice mindfulness when we're always multitasking. So for example, for me, one of the things I've been trying to get better at is when I'm going on longer runs or when I'm spending time outside trying to get some exercise in, mowing, whatever, I automatically just put my AirPods in because I'm like, I need to take in information. I need to redeem this time. Whatever I want to say for how it's making me more productive. Yeah. And I've been trying to say, no, when I don't do that, I can actually be more mindful of, like, I'm like, all right, I'm going to spend 5 minutes at a time of my next, I've got 30 minutes, 6 people in my family. So I'm like 5 minutes at a time. I'm just going to spend praying for each one of us. So being more mindful of something rather than like just taking in information. Like I'm still probably multitasking at that point, you could argue, because I'm praying while I'm mowing or running or whatever, but it's just helping me be much more mindful of what's going on in my life, mindful of praying for the people that matter in my life. And so trying to redeem some of that time with just mindful exercise of praying or focusing on my, like when I actually hear my breath, I can focus on my breath. Like, so if I'm running and I just have music in and whatever, like I don't even know that I'm not even breathing through my nose, which is healthy, or I'm not focused on my breath. But when I'm actually like unplugged, I'm like, oh, I can all of a sudden like, I can feel my heart actually beating. I can hear me actually breathing. I can be pulled into all of those things, which I think is a helpful exercise. And there's something freeing, as well about that.
So another layer to that would be, and I feel like this is like an uncomfortable part of mindfulness that we don't do, is so the next layer of that would be to be aware of how you feel. Like, I'm doing this and I've spent time like intentionally praying for my family. How does that feel? And like being mindful of, man, I feel really good and I feel really close to my family, and that makes me feel happy. And then how does my body feel? Like, I feel really calm. Like, I feel really satisfied. And so being mindful is having your mind have a direction, but then like also noticing like, man, what is this doing to my spirit, and how is that affecting me? And so that's like another layer. One thing that I'm really trying to do, this is like my challenge to myself this summer, with my kids out of school, is to, when my kids walk into a room or they talk to me, no matter what I'm doing, to like look at them in the eyes. Cause I feel like so many times I notice like I'm doing something and they're talking to me and I'm like, yeah, like, and I'm talking to them and not, but just like how important like looking in your kid's eyeballs or like somebody's eyeballs is. And just like, I see you, like I'm doing something else, but I'll be right back. And just like how simple that can be, to be mindful of them in the room and like, you have my attention, but to be able to just like incorporate that. So you can ask me how I'm doing on that later.
The crazy thing is like, I know all that, right? Like I think we know all that.
Yeah, but it's hard, and it makes
there's like
holds a lot of
this addiction that we don't want to talk about. Like I know without a shadow of doubt when my kids walk in the room or my wife walks in the room, full well, and I will tell anybody that asks me for advice about this that you need to do that, and yet. Like I make every excuse for myself in the world for why I don't do that. My wife's probably like amening you right there and be like, Alex, did you listen to Jess? And I'll hear about that on the podcast, which she's right. And so there is this subtle addiction we don't want to talk about of how it is ruining or at least desensitizing us and doing things in our lives. And we can't give it up. And it starts to own us, and we don't own it anymore. And that line gets pretty blurry.
I heard a psychologist, I can't remember who it was, talking about this recently. And I feel like it makes me feel emotional because of just like how he talked about it, and just like the closest people in our lives, like our family, but I think even like outer layers, like coworkers or that. Like when we look up from something, especially our phone, that 8 billion people have a connection to us through that. When I look up, I say, you are more important than 8 billion other people in the world. And just like how that creates so much value and security, like in our family, you can tell, like, it's just very convicting to me, whether it's a phone or something else, like you matter to me. And I'm like, you're right. It's simple. It's free, but those teeny things are so hard to remember or even do because we're in a culture that doesn't necessarily think about that. Yeah. But we're trying.
Let's talk a little bit about time blocking then. Who can help me understand time blocking? From what I understand, it's a way to like schedule your day. I mean, that's and I know some people will get down to almost like a macro level of, okay, from 9 a.m. to 9:03 a.m. I'm thinking about this, and then from 9:03 to 9:15 I'm doing this. And then, I mean, I know that's like really hyper focused version of it, but I mean, am I right? Is that kind of what? Time, like really setting aside time for certain things.
Do you have anything?
No, yeah, and I think it's trying to set a time aside for time for certain things while single tasking. I mean, I think at the end of the day is the goal of that too. Yeah. So it's only for this and not to multitask. And so again, I think turning off notifications or saying I'm not going to check my email, or some people are like, I only check my email. So they would say I have a time block where I'm only checking my email at 9 a.m., 5 p.m., and maybe that's the only two things, or never am I, So it could be as much as down to the minute, or as much as like only these days are time blocks for never checking email, and so on and so forth.
Another thing that is really easy to do is like how I would do this with teenagers or kids or even adults is I'm like, okay, make a playlist of like 3 or 4 of your favorite songs. And during that time you're cleaning or you're doing a task. So it's like, that it's only going to be 9 to 12 minutes or something like that to get it done. And also I can't remember the website, but there is even a new website. I've used it once where if you have to get something done, there are other people that also need to get things done. Do you know what I'm talking about? No. And you can log in. It's like you can get 3 free sessions a month, and there is somebody else that needs to do a task, and they will be your accountability on your computer with you, but they're doing their own work. So it's like, I did it one time when I had like 20 notes to do, and I was like, I just need to focus. And this other person was like, I'm like they were making like an Excel spreadsheet. And so, but they were both there. But it was like an hour block. they're very small, and then it's like you're getting stuff done. There's lots of different things that are being created that are like that to help us get things done.
Is it just timeblock.com?
It could be, but it's a real person. I'd have to get into my email.
You got to join the wait list on that one.
Yeah.
It's pretty easy. You schedule it. Yeah.
That seems like in some ways
really interesting.
That seems like that could be really helpful to me, but also it sounds horrifying to me in some ways. Like I'm afraid of that much structure.
Both reasons are why I did it.
Yeah. I'm like, I don't want to.
The people pleaser in me was like, I'm not going to let this stranger down that knows what I have to do, doesn't know what I have to do.
All right. Let's talk a little bit about detoxing, and maybe specifically in the digital realm. This can also be part of your time block to detox from your digital device for a certain period of time during the day. What are some other helpful ways that we can detox ourselves from the digital realm? Unplug. Jessica, I can see you're ready to go. Give me an example.
Even yesterday I was meeting with somebody and they're going on vacation, and I was like, okay, what apps are you removing from your phone? Like what are you signing out of?
Or social? Or?
And I think it's not this all or nothing, but it's like, hey, what are you going to remove? It's okay to stay connected. Like we're saying, we're not saying it's bad. I'm not even saying distraction is bad, because sometimes we just need to zone out, and that's really healthy for our brains too. But it's like, okay, what can you remove? And so to me, I'm like, what can you sign out of? What don't you need? What doesn't need accessibility to you?
Mm-hmm.
Alex, I feel like this is your realm too.
Not my realm I've at all perfected, but yeah, I'm trying to get better at utilizing, some of the focus modes and doing some of those things on because I'm not strong enough, disciplined enough to get this done on my own. And so like I'm trying to even set certain boundaries for how long I can be on apps. Man, I can be on Facebook a certain amount of days, and I will go hard on that 30 minutes while I'm on Facebook. But outside of that, like
you're poking everybody.
Everybody. I'm buying every Bob stroller there is on the marketplace. I am, But then outside of that, it's just kind of creating those spaces where it's not having that, and trying to detox from just taking in all the mediums, like I mentioned earlier, just on some of my runs lately. I've been trying to just detox from always having to, stay connected and be intaking something and feel good about, that type of stuff. And just being, because I'm realizing how much and I think it's fake peace, it's like plastic peace that's not real, is just tied to knowing everything, like being in the know, being tied to FOMO, being tied to all of these different things. And I'm realizing like I outsource my peace a lot. And I think outsourced peace will lead to like outrage in our lives. And so I think often when I'm outsourcing my peace compared to, oh, did I see this? Am I always in the know? And that makes me feel good. And I don't know what to do if not. Then it's just this fake, insecure, insignificant peace. But when I actually source my peace in God's word, when I source my peace in praying for people, like try to be non-empathetic towards someone after you've prayed for them. Like I've had to realize like my heart posture even towards people when reading an email, responding to things, I have to like, okay, go check myself and check where my heart's at, and then maybe reread it once I've prayed for them after I've gotten, an email or phone call that's kind of moving my peace needle away from that towards anger. And so that's one of the things that I've tried to do, and have to detox from these places where I'm like, this is just leading to constant anxiety or constant non-peace. Okay, I need to clear away from that. Just like you would with a meal detox. If you're like, all right, well, every time I eat cheese, things go south, and I'm in the bathroom the whole time.
TMI.
Typically things go south. If they're going north,
well,
that's another problem.
So it's just realizing, but it's being aware enough to realize those things. And sometimes it takes you not going to an allergy doctor to figure
Yeah.
out, okay, what's wrong, but doing that same type of deep work into your own soul and asking tough questions about what do I need to
It's like doing the challenging thing is challenging.
Yeah.
But I think that's always where the reward comes in too. I think going on a walk instead of zoning out on your phone or whatever, takes more effort and energy to do that, but the reward is better. And it's so difficult to get to that place to just commit to it. And for a lot of people, I know for myself included, it's like, yeah, I should do that, but I can easily convince myself that this thing I'm doing, this form of distraction is more important right now.
And I've never, like, anytime I've talked to someone or done it myself where I have detoxed, you don't ever hear from someone who's like, that was trash. Like anytime someone does, like, yeah, and I didn't miss all of those things.
Yeah.
But then we easily just dive right back into the sugar, to the candy, to the artificial.
Yeah.
And then we're like, oh, why do I feel so bad all the time?
Yeah.
I think about the life of Jesus, and also like Jesus didn't have a smartphone and he didn't have the digital distractions maybe that we had, but I feel like we have a lot of examples from Jesus because he easily could have been distracted all day he could have said, oh, there's a line 3 miles long and everybody wants to be healed. And he could have done that all day and not had conversations. But Jesus created a lot of margin. And I think that as I was thinking about this and thinking about the life of Jesus, I was like, man, it really matters who's close to us too, because he was around and he picked people in his community that respected what he needed and wanted him to be healthy. And they were okay if he needed to take a nap. Like they trusted him. And I think, maybe Jesus didn't have a phone in his hand, but there were lots of things that could have distracted him, or he could have had this one track mind where he could have done something for a solid week and not looked up. But man, he's one of the people that saw people the most, and he saw people's hearts and he noticed people. And so it's like, what can we learn from him? And it's like, he always had his eyes up. He was looking in people's eyeballs. When someone came up, he didn't stay looking down here at the ground. He noticed them, just kind of like what we want to do with people. And so I don't know.
Well,
Do you guys have any
I think it's
thoughts
just
about
so much of our problem is not acknowledging that other people want exactly what we want. We're in denial. Like people want connectivity. They want to be heard. They want to be seen. They want to be appreciated. They want to be loved. They want to be cared for. They want someone invested in them. And we all want that, but then we're unwilling to give it to someone else. And yet we would expect it to be given to us. And I think that's that challenge. Like, how do we commit to that? And how do we make that time because people, your loved ones, and people in general, honestly, are not distractions. But I think it's the things around them that become the distractions. But I think when people are looking, I mean, you can't just open your life up to everyone. But I think when there's people that want your time, it's definitely more valuable to give it to them than these things that are distracting us. As we start to wrap things up, let's talk a little bit about goal setting and prioritizing how we handle this, because I think it is a lot of times about just doing the one thing and not maybe doing everything all at once, or at least starting with kind of a simple goal, because then you do kind of get that dopamine hit of, hey, I accomplished this goal. Now maybe I can add 2 goals, or I can, whatever. What are some helpful ways for people to get started in a real tangible way?
I would say pick something, and don't make your goal to move the needle like all the way across, but how can you move the needle 1% is what I will usually say to somebody. Like you're overwhelmed, or you're distracted and you're feeling anxious, whatever that is valid. And what can you pick that's small and tangible that will move the needle 1%? Because that's farther than you were. And I think staying there and taking off like a bite-sized chunk versus I'm having this whole thing that I'm not even going to accomplish because it's just another thing that at the end of the day I'm not going to be able to do is not fair. And so I would never tell anybody to do that, but even through the things we talked about, what's one thing that maybe we've brought up today that's like, I can incorporate this a little bit more? Or I think a good question would be, what have we talked about today that is even a way that's going to enhance your faith life or your conversations with the Lord? Or what's the best thing that's going to fit into your day-to-day life with your family or your friends? Like, that is something that you're going to be naturally drawn to something and then apply it in a small way first and build onto that.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, I think most of us, it's not a lack of knowledge. I think most of us don't have a knowledge problem. It's an acknowledgement problem. And so, like, we all know there's so many tools, but it's the lack of willingness to acknowledge, okay, this is my problem, and how do I move on with a solution? And I think the other issue sometimes at hand is we want to force other people to acknowledge these things about themselves. And I think when we maybe doing a digital detox has been super meaningful to you, let people see the fruit of it. You don't have to like preach about it all the time.
Yeah.
And I think that's the thing is when we try to prescribe somebody else's best next step to them, that's where things kind of get dangerous. Is maybe for one person, man, because of how they're wired and the job that they have, time blocking is that best next step that they need to do. Maybe it's not the digital detox, but I'm like, no, I did a digital detox and everybody in the world should do it. And they need to see the fruit that actually came in my life from that of, man, someone's like, dude, you're so much more peaceful. Like, you just seem to have like this thing about you that's just different. And then I think that opens the avenue to like preach about that thing. I think it's the same with the gospel. When people see, that you've been with Jesus, when people see the fruit of the Spirit in your life, they're going to be so much more apt to say, what is that? Like that, there's something so attractive about that. But when you spend so much of your time, like not modeling the fruit of the Spirit, but preaching about the fruit of the Spirit, I think the two things aren't always the same. And so I think the thing that's attractive that people saw about Jesus was like, man, like you said, Jess, he would spend time with the Father daily. Like that was a rhythm. You read the Gospels and you would always see Jesus withdrew to a lonely place and reconnect with his Father. He was drained just like the batteries of our phones, and he had to go replug into his Father so he could even minister well to people. And so I think that's a big thing too. I think especially if you're a Christian, is invite the Spirit to say, hey, I need you to help me. I trust that you are wise enough that you know me better than I know myself. Help me. I can't get this done on my own. Help me see in my life clearly where the next step for me to take to surrender this thing to you is. And I think one, God promises that he send us an advocate that will help us on our behalf. And two, I think you're going to have so much of a better shot realizing, hey, I don't have to get this done on my own, but that the Spirit of God will reveal this thing to me. And I think that's, especially those of us that are Christians, you're going to have a much better success rate, I think, by doing that. And then again, doing it in community, talking about these things. I wasn't saying don't tell somebody what you're doing, but confess these things to one another, challenge one another in these spaces as well. And I think it'll sharpen us all.
Yeah, that's great. All right, well, there's some practical ways to implement that. Hopefully this has been helpful to everyone listening. But if you have any questions or concerns, you want to reach out to us, you can do that, as always, on social media, on Instagram or TikTok at CCCOMA Podcast. You can send us an email to podcast@cccomaha.org or leave us a voicemail at 402-885-9930. Until next time, we'll talk to you then.